Unitarian Universalists do not have to let go of personal experiences, practices, or beliefs to be part of this community. We join together on a journey that honors all our individual backgrounds and experiences. Our beliefs are diverse and inclusive. We have no shared creed. Our shared covenant is expressed through the inseparable and deeply interdependent shared values of interdependence, pluralism, justice, transformation, generosity, and equity, all centered around love. Although Unitarianism and Universalism both have origins as liberal Christian traditions, today we embrace diverse teachings from many different global religions and philosophies. Unitarian Universalists believe more than one thing. We think for ourselves and reflect together about important topics like the following: the existence of a higher power, life and death, sacred texts, prayer, and spiritual practices. We are united in our broad and inclusive outlook and in our shared values. We are united in shared experience, in our open and stirring worship services, religious education, and rites of passage, our work for justice, our commitment to center the experiences and needs of the marginalized and most vulnerable among us, and our dedication to living in a way that always centers love. I had a hard time narrowing this sermon down to an amount that can be presented and digested in 15 or 20 minutes. Maybe this is because I'm not really a detailed person except in subject areas where I have a high level of knowledge and experience, despite what some people think. There are people who think that I'm a detailed person. Surprise, I'm not. Maybe it's because I am one of those everything is everything kinds of thinkers. By this, I mean that one thought leads fairly easily to a different thought in my mind. Seemingly everything is related, even if only a little. I'm a very frustrating person to argue with, at least partly because something in me resists the debate aspect. If I sense that you're very intent on winning the argument, I'm likely to be out of there. I love to think through a situation, but without the pressure that focusing on changing someone's mind brings. I'm interested in discussing topics with others who can see more than one perspective at a time, and increasingly, I am not at all interested in people who can view situations only their own way. Then again, maybe I'm inclined towards a kind of life review with its very global, big picture focus. After all, I am 70 and past all the young adult and middle-aged milestones. My kids are in their 30s. I have a granddaughter. My husband and I have owned a home for almost 35 years. We've both experienced work success and failure. I have significant volunteer activities, friends, and personal interests. So given that I have maybe 20 or 25 years left to live, it seems natural to me to reflect on my values, on how I try to live my life, on what I most crave from other people. That's still too big a topic for one sermon, so I'm going to reflect on one personal characteristic that means a lot to me. Carl Rogers, the famous mid-20th century psychotherapist and founder of person-centered therapy, lists therapist congruence as one of the three most important conditions for a successful therapeutic environment. By congruence, he meant that what of themselves a therapist shows to the client must match what's actually going on inside the therapist. In other words, the therapist must be authentic, not putting on an act, not making some clever pretense, not playing expert. None of his three, the therapist congruence I mentioned, or accurate empathy, or unconditional positive regard, strike me as techniquey or specialized. They strike me as good and desirable traits in any of us. The second condition is accurate empathy. How many people do you know who display accurate empathy or perspective taking or understanding of the other's viewpoint? We can guess what someone else's we can guess what someone else's experience is and how they might feel, but for real accuracy, we'd have to ask questions. It strikes me that a lot of people are reluctant to ask questions, preferring to make assumptions or just guess. For genuine, meaningful empathy, we have to acknowledge the gap between what we currently understand and what we want to understand. We can feel sorry for someone without understanding, but we cannot feel accurate empathy without it. The third condition is unconditional positive regard. Now, unconditional positive regard does not mean approval of everything someone does. It just recognizes that the petty, thoughtless things that good people do sometimes doesn't impact their essential goodness. Unconditional positive regard also reflects the belief that people have the ability to solve their own problems, provided that the therapy or other factors influencing their behavior can allow their true selves to shine through. It has crossed my mind that Rogers might have been a Unitarian Universalist if he had been born into different circumstances, as unconditional positive regard is really just a way of affirming the inherent worth and dignity of every person. It asks that we acknowledge the difference between the inherent personhood of any of us and our behavior, which is shaped by circumstance far more than we realize. Sometimes circumstances seem to require responses from us that are beyond our capacity at the time. That doesn't mean that we're bad or worthless. It may point to an area where there's room for personal growth, but none of it means we're defective or tainted in some way. All of these three conditions that Rogers deemed essential for positive therapeutic environment could be unpacked considerably, as all three reflect his deepest beliefs about the nature of humans. He considered that providing these three conditions was the responsibility of the therapist because of what he believed about people. He believed that most people were essentially good and capable of making good decisions about their own lives if their inner natures and resources could be uncovered. He saw that so many people were enacting unhelpful learning acquired through well-meant socialization, lack of knowledge of others who might be different, interpretations of events around them that reflect misunderstanding of those differences, and particularly in mainstream American culture, a tendency to resist deep self-knowledge. The upshot of all this is that too often we don't even know the real us. Quick example. How many women in here were admonished to smile more? Almost every day for me. How many men got the boys don't cry message? Ooh. How many of you internalized either of those two messages such that you in turn delivered them to someone else? You might have said, "You're so pretty when you smile," or "That smile of yours brightens the whole room." It might not be as blatant as "You'll never get a man with that sour face," but the message was clear enough. I raised two boys, so I was always hypersensitive to the boys don't cry message. I tried really hard. Wait, hold a second. I tried really hard to accept their feelings, including the most vulnerable of them. But there are lots of bad cultural messages out there. And by the way, I'm not perfect. I cringe a little to think that I might have hurt my guys in that way, but I'm sure I did sometimes. Non-binary people have a burden to carry that most of us don't realize. The pressure to conform to gender expectations is intense and unrelenting. Some people really don't feel that they fit into either of those two buckets presented to them, and they pay a heavy price for their authenticity. Some of us may have realized at some point in our lives we might have become aware of the extent that we were socialized into gender stereotypes based on whatever gender other people thought we were. A few of us may have begun the process of resisting that socialization and to refute it. Even fewer of us may have become self-aware enough to overcome false socialization and have a corrected idea of who we really are. Messages along gender identity lines like smile more and big boys don't cry are only part of the script we follow. There are hundreds of lessons learned through the process of socialization, mostly unconsciously given and received. So how do we even know who we really are? And what part of us is just the way we were told we're supposed to be? What does it mean to be authentically oneself? Brene Brown, PhD social researcher, defines authenticity as the daily practice of letting go of who we think we're supposed to be and embracing who we are. Choosing authenticity means cultivating the courage to be imperfect, to set boundaries, to allow ourselves to be vulnerable, exercising the compassion that comes from knowing that we are all made of strength and struggle, and nurturing the connection and sense of belonging that can only happen when we believe we are enough. Authenticity demands wholehearted living and loving, even when it's hard, even when we're wrestling with the shame and fear of not being good enough, and especially when the joy is so intense that we're afraid to let ourselves feel it. Mindfully practicing authenticity during our most soul-searching struggles is how we invite grace, joy, and gratitude into our lives. Any one of these 5 characteristics of authenticity warrant a sermon on its own. How many people do you know who have the courage to reveal their imperfections? Who are able to set boundaries? Who have the courage to reveal their imperfections? Who allow themselves to be vulnerable? Who have the compassion that comes from knowing that we are having a mixture of strengths and weaknesses is our common ground. And 5, believe they are enough. All 5? I think that it's mostly true that people hide the things they're not good at, or what they believe they should be good at, but they're not. I'm probably not the person you want working on your car, but then again, I don't expect expertise from myself in that area. I have always had excruciatingly high expectations from myself in the area of parenting and kicked myself every time I didn't meet them. Most of the time, I meet my own expectations regarding the degree of dressed upness, but I kind of doubt that I meet any number of other people's expectations in that arena. I used to care a lot about living up to that standard, and I tried harder. I have long since realized that it's another one of those places where there's discrepancy according to gender. I have done a lot of my own internal work on this and suspect that my decreasing concern with appropriate dress can be attributed to that. The discrepancy does not meet with my approval, and I will not cooperate with it under most circumstances. Setting boundaries. That's very current. There's a lot of talk about boundaries in the media and in private conversation. Do you know what's meant by the word boundary in the realm of society and people's behavior? I'll give you a visual as a starter, but you'll have to use your imaginations a little bit. I'm not quite as free as I would be in person. This over here is what's okay with me in this or that situation. And that is what's not okay with me in the same situation. The place where they meet is the boundary. Under usual circumstances, the individual in question sets the boundary between what's okay with them and what's not okay with them. As an example, I personally will accept people being a few minutes late to an hour-long meeting without getting upset. At 10 minutes late, I begin to get squirmy. The boundary I draw between acceptable and uncomfortable degrees of lateness for another person is about 10 minutes. The boundary I set for myself in this circumstance is much tighter. I castigate myself for being even a minute or two tardy. Another example, being on time in my Monday night choral rehearsal means being situated in my seat and ready to rehearse at 7:30. The conductor says, my downbeat, this is a downbeat, the upbeat, downbeat. Downbeat is when you sing right then. It's at 7:30. On time means being prepared to respond to that downbeat appropriately. Anything other than that is late. There have been a few occasions where people have been asked to leave the ensemble for chronic lateness, so I suppose it's not too hard to trace the origins of me in that particular boundary. Boundaries between acceptable and unacceptable, between what we do and what they do, or what we do and we don't do, are commonly variable according to the situation and the people involved and the circumstances, and they can change over time. The most important thing to remember right now is that, according to Brown, an authentic person decides for themselves what is okay and what is not okay with regards to them. They don't feel they must let other people violate those boundaries. This doesn't mean that they get nasty about invoking a boundary. They don't put people down. They don't yell and scream and get upset. But it does mean that they're clear about it most of the time. What does being vulnerable look like? It looks like publicly trying something new when you're probably not good at it yet. It means showing your hurt in front of someone, especially someone you don't know very well. It could mean saying, I don't know, or revealing uncertainty. It's saying, I love you first. It's openly breaking down or crying. It's exposing yourself to criticism, and it is scary for most of us. But Brown calls it a necessary ingredient in being authentic. In a culture that values certainty and runs from uncertainty as much as mainstream American culture does, vulnerability is anathema and deeply unsettling. The most important ingredient in 4, from my point of view, is the acknowledgement of a trait that all of us, shared by all of us, that we're all capable sometimes and complete goofs at other times. We're all gentle and loving sometimes and rigid and sarcastic at other times. We're all leaders and followers, helpful and a hindrance, full of a desperate need to be looked up to, and content to just sit and watch. And knowing that all of us are both and is the most solid basis for compassion. The superior feeling sorry for isn't genuine compassion. Finally, there is the hardest consideration. Authentic people feel that they are enough. Every day, almost hourly, we are bombarded with messaging that declares us to be inadequate in some way or ways. People who want you to buy their product, whether that's a brand of shampoo or a type of behavior, have a vested interest in you depending on them for your sense of worth. We are encouraged to believe that we must please many people or it will be terrible. But here's the catch. Trying to please someone and trying to displease someone are really just two sides of the same coin. Authenticity lies in choosing behavior that springs from your own values and estimation of a situation. Of course, you probably would choose to consult with someone else if you don't think you're knowledgeable enough, skilled enough, or possessed of the necessary perspective to assess something accurately. You may decide that your own input isn't called for in the situation. But unless you are in custody of the legal system, it is your call. They, meaning your parents, your teachers, your neighbors, department store employee trying to sell you a What's-It, profit by our feeling like our sense of worth depends on their approval. That you are not adequate or enough unless you heed their advice or buy their product. This is in direct opposition to our principle affirming the inherent worth and dignity of every person. There's the inherent worth, not based on anything other than what you think of you. Carl Rogers, the famous psychotherapist I spoke of earlier, would be horrified that people are discouraged from unconditionally regarding themselves positively. And if people doubt their inherent worth, if they think they are not enough, how do you think they regard other people? I suppose this is one of those which came first, the chicken or the egg things, as I, for one, can't really say if a poor self-image leads us inclined to a poor perception of other people, or if believing that others are inadequate leads us to the conclusion that we must be inadequate as well. I'll leave that question for another day. So, what do you think? How many of you were okay with not being perfect? Really good. Even excellent much of the time, just not perfect. How many of you can set a boundary without wondering what people will think or feeling that you're being too harsh? How many of you can allow yourselves to be vulnerable? With whom can you let down your guard? Can you acknowledge the combination of traits, of desirable and undesirable traits within yourself that give you the common ground that you have with the rest of the world, that make you human, that make accurate empathy even a possibility? And lastly, do you know what enough feels like with regards to your inherent self? Material goods, time, personal attractiveness, talent, and skill. All of us are enough, are completely acceptable human beings, but do we recognize it and act out of it? If I could give you all stickers or badges saying I am enough, I would. I am a huge fan of the new Article 2 that was so controversial a couple of years ago, but I still think wistfully about the previous first principle that we act and we affirm and promote the inherent worth and dignity of all people. Then again, the new Article 2 points to ways of behaving that are admirable, so maybe I won't be disappointed for much longer. After all, behavior is a pretty reliable indicator of the beliefs motivating a person, more so than what they say about themselves. We're seeing evidence of that on the current political front almost hourly. Towards the end of the Sermon on the Mount, wherein Jesus teaches the gathered in that place, by their fruits you shall know them. Sometimes behavior is the best evidence of faulty socialization, even when it contradicts the words surrounding the behavior, perhaps especially when it contradicts the words used. I will leave you with this quote from another favorite of mine, analytic psychiatrist Carl Gustav Jung, who said that the privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are. May it be so.